Hey guys, Firebat here, bringing you another Madness at the Darkmoon Faire card review. I'm not sure which number this is, they've been coming out so frequently, it's actually crazy. So, just trying to keep up here, barely keeping my head above water with the content schedule. There's all these sorts of new things for duels, battlegrounds, standard, it's kind of crazy. This is going to be my third video today, so pretty nuts. Anyway, starting off, first we have a neutral card, Horrendous Growth. So this is only a 2-mana 2/2, but it does threaten to be able to continually grow as you corrupt it. It's kind of like a Shadanax Rammus in that sense. It comes down one turn earlier, but it doesn't have the stealth, so it's not immediately active. If this had like Rush or something that could make use of the stats after you've corrupted it a few times, it'd be a lot better. Maybe you pair it with the Rush Lackey or some other sorts of features that could give it some of those keywords to make use of it instantaneously. That's the thing I think this card's going to struggle with the most is, sure, you got this big thing in your hand, but now you got to play this big thing. It's going to sit there and go, duh, and then they get to have a chance to remove it. So you're investing into something that has no immediate payoff, which could be a bit tricky. It does have some synergy with Yasharaj the Defiler though, so you will be able to get it back. If you were to get, let's say like every time you corrupt it, Yasharaj gave you another one of these back, so you could get like 10 with Yasharaj back, that would be insane, but I highly doubt it works that way. So for me, it's yet to be seen if this card's going to really do anything. It needs some way to activate its potential, but the potential is there. Next up, we have the Stiltstepper. So this is a Demon Hunter cycle card. It looks like something that could work really well with cheap outcast cards, all sorts of things like that. It kind of functions as a Crimson Sigil runner, where it's like a pretty well-statted minion for an aggro deck, and you're not too sad if you top deck this in the late game, because oftentimes top decking this in the late game means you're going to be able to play the card it draws and be able to get that juicy 4 bonus attack damage sending right at their face. So this to me screams aggro Demon Hunter card, and it has maybe some synergy with like Blur or some of these other cheap cards. Maybe you could eventually get enough card draw in Demon Hunter that you can justify utilizing Blur so that you can save your lifesteal for that new legendary, maybe, because you don't want to use lifesteal for lifestealing, you want to use lifesteal for killing them with that big new legendary. Next we have the Ticketmasters. So this is a rogue card that shuffles things into your deck. We've had a lot of cards in Hearthstone that have shuffled cards into your deck. Most recently, we've had like the Portal Keepers and things like that, which the Portal Keeper has a pretty trash body for its effect, so nobody really played the Portal Keeper. This Ticketmaster screams a little bit more playability because it's a 3-mana 4/3, and you're like, hey, that's even better than a 3-mana 3/3, and I wouldn't have been mad if it was a 3-mana 3/3, so maybe this is good, and we could maybe see it being played. It does not do quite as much as the other cards of this variety that have seen success, right? You talk about Ysera Unleashed, why was that card so powerful? Is because the effect is so strong that you can consider building your deck around making sure that its effect procs. However, this card, its effect is only 3 tickets, maybe you run 2 of them, you got 6 tickets, they're only 3/3s, 3/3s are quite predictable, your opponent can plan on how they want to balance their removal for taking care of these minions, whereas something like Ysera, your opponent's like, I have no idea what these dragons are going to be, what special effects they're going to have, what other things they're going to generate, what removal I need to make sure that I save to be able to react to this. So Ticketmaster's predictability is actually a huge downside in how strong the effect is going to be. However, a 3-mana 4/3 with all these stats tied to it, if Rogue happens to be a class that just draws a bunch, maybe it just finds its way in there. I wouldn't discount it just yet. It seems potentially quite playable, but not as meta-defining or shaping as, you know, Ysera, obviously. Next up, we have the Nameless One. This is the classic Priest card. It's a silence and it's a steal, so it's just everything Priest flavor all wrapped into one. It's probably going to be one of the most annoying cards to deal with. If you compare it to the other silence cards in the game, it's pretty laughable. Spellbreaker has less stats than it and no copy effect, so Spellbreaker is way worse than this card. And if you even compare it to, you know, you're like, well, this one's a class card and Spellbreaker's not a class card. You compare it to Cabal Songstealer, which was the Priest class card variation of this card previously. The Nameless One knocks it out of the water because the Nameless One is also getting that beautiful copy effect. And if you're bothering silencing something, generally it has an effect / death rattle that you really want to copy for yourself. So yeah, this card is really powerful, I think, and is going to be one of the strongest silence options available. So I bet you it'll see some play. Next up, we have a Wicked Whispers. Discard effects back in Warlock. We've had a few discard effects happening still. Maybe a little bit less so in this kind of vein. Usually when you discard something, you get a minion in play, like a big Doomguard, for example, or something like that, or you've drawn cards lately. Has been a theme of discard. We haven't had too many board buff payoffs, so I think this is something that is really necessary to make the discard zoo archetype kind of happen. It works really well with Hand of Gul'dan to be able to refill your hand, and it works really well with this card that is still in Standard. Correct me in the comments if I'm wrong. I haven't seen a lot of Bone Web Egg floating around, but I'm pretty sure this is still in Standard. And I'm not sure how this interaction is quite gonna work. If you Wicked Whispers to discard the Bone Web Egg, will it buff the 2/1 spiders into 3/2 spiders? What's the order there? Does the discard happen and then the Death Rattle happen? Or, which way is it gonna fall? I presume you'd probably just get 2/1 spiders, but if you get 3/2 spiders, then that's actually a pretty good synergy there, because Bone Web Egg is very often gonna be your lowest cost card, whereas Hand of Gul'dan is gonna be a little bit trickier to discard because it's gonna be your highest cost card. But the Wicked Whispers is kind of a finisher, so you're probably going to be doing it when you have a few amount of cards in hand anyway. Either way, I think it's definitely one of the stronger cards that could push the zoo archetype. Next we have the Carousel Griffin, which is kind of intriguing. As a 5-mana 5/5 mech, that's not a bad stat line for just a chunky Divine Shield minion. And then it has this Corrupt on top of it to give it a little bit more versatility. I'm not so sure the Corrupt part is actually going to be all that useful. It's kind of like a worse Winged Guardian, but it is a Paladin card, and Paladins traditionally have had pretty garbage cards. So you can't play, the way the Corrupt works is you'd have to have this in your hand, play a 6-cost card, and then play it on turn 7. That's why I'm comparing it to a 7-drop here. And when I went through all the 7-drops, it looked like the second best defensive 7-drop behind Wing Guardian. And Wing Guardian is kind of a banger of a card. So it puts it in an okay spot. Nothing that I'm gonna be like, you know, let's get super excited about and freak out about, but something where you're like, all right, that's reasonable. And then we throw in this synergy with Y'Shaarj the Defiler. This is exactly the kind of thing you're going to be wanting to get back from Y'Shaarj. Something defensive, something that costs a lot of mana, and you can play the turn that you play Y'Shaarj. So pretty powerful synergy there to maybe make that old god work, as well as it could potentially work with the new N'Zoth being able to bring back 1 minion of every single type, because it is a mech, and it's one of the better standalone defensive mechs, and defensive things are what you're going to want when you're playing your 10-drop. So I think there's some potential here, but I'm not thrilled about it. But it does seem like something that could be the glue to one of these Y'Shaarj or N'Zoth decks. It fits in one of those old god packages for sure. Next up we have ETC God of Metal. So this card is kind of interesting, and by kind of I mean very. It allows you to turn your rush minions basically into charge minions. I mean, you can't go face with them directly, but it does allow you to trade with your opponent's board, take value trades, which then causes your opponent to take a little bit of chip damage. Maybe working in that rush warrior, that rush enrage style warrior as some way to get some chip damage in so you can get closer to finishing, because that archetype has always been really struggling at closing the game. Like, it does a really good job against aggro and controlling the board because you get to dictate the trades with your rush minions, but just closing the game against control has always been brutal, and this should help a lot with being able to make some of these rush minions that don't have a target being able to do a little bit more work on the board. And maybe, in my dream world, we make Playmaker be able to see play. I doubt it's going to be enough to push Playmaker, but I've wanted to see Playmaker get a lot of standard play, and it just really hasn't. So it's got some interesting synergies with here where you can duplicate rush minions and then rush a bunch of small things into a big thing to push face damage for crazy combos. I'm excited to see if maybe that could happen. As well as there's like Restless Mummy, or there's the Galakrond Dragon from Warrior that makes 3 copies of itself and you can rush in each copy. The Restless Mummy plus copy the Restless Mummy is going to be 4 different rush procs, being able to do 8 damage. There's all sorts of little combos that can get a bunch of chip damage, and they are just kind of like reasonable cards that you can throw in your Tempo Warrior. So I'm excited to see if Tempo Warrior actually emerges as an archetype and gets a little bit more support. I don't think this is enough to do it, but I think it's a start. It's a step in the direction of Tempo Enrage Warrior thing, and it's exciting. Next up we have a Ringmaster Whatley, which could potentially go into that kind of archetype. It brings a draw of 3 different minion archetypes So it's very similar to what the Curator was. The Curator, a little bit slow, though. The Curator came down on 7, but graced us with that beautiful taunt tag. This comes down on 5, and I dare I say it draws more relevant minion types to the class. You're going to be able to get a Pirate, which means you can get that Risky Skipper. You're going to be able to get a Mech, so you can get that 4/5 when it dies, gain armor equal to its attack guy. You're going to be able to get the Dragons. You can get the Galakron Dragon or Deathwing Mad Aspect. There's very powerful options in Standard right now for all of Mech, Dragon, and Pirate, for specifically Warrior. So the draw on this seems insane. It seems like it's going to be better than Curator, and Curator saw, I would say, a lot of play originally, and then slowly fell off into fringe play over time. I think that Ringmaster Whatley is eclipsing Curator in power level right now. And you also have this synergy with the N'Zoth God of the Deep. If you don't want to go a more aggressive route with the Ringmaster Whatley, it will just be able to function as a good tutor to find all of your different sorts of types of creatures to set up your N'Zoth Warrior deck. So it's kind of cool. And I love that N'Zoth Warrior was a deck before. Like when the original Old Gods N'Zoth Warrior was a really solid deck. And it'd be funny if N'Zoth Warrior becomes a deck again, but in a totally different way. Because before it was N'Zoth Death Rattle Warrior, now it's going to be N'Zoth Menagerie Warrior. It's a nice little throwback, and I like the flavor. And lastly, we have Ringmaster Baton. So this is a hand buff warrior weapon that tries to work with Menagerie. And hand buff cards are always really tricky to evaluate. I was looking at a bunch of different hand buff cards, and a lot of them have really steep conditionals or high initial mana cost. So I think this is going to feel more like Smuggler's Run, because it's a hand buff card that can come out really, really early. And it doesn't cost very much mana. It's actually more efficient than Smuggler's Run when you look at that. It has 3 swings, and you're probably not going to have more than 3 or 4 minions in your hand anyway during that time. So if you're able to just like get this thing out on turn 2 and swing 3 times, the amount of stats you're going to have is ridiculous. And like I said earlier, there's a really solid pool of, you know, mechs and dragons to go with this kind of effect that Menagerie Warrior might end up being a thing, whether in the mid-range variety or in the aggressive variety. If you throw in like South Sea Deckhand and things like that, there's options there. Or you end up doing the full control route and making it go all the way to that N'Zoth. It seems like there's a lot of room there, a lot of flexibility, a lot of different ways you can utilize this card. And a 1-damage weapon's nothing to scoff at in the early game, honestly. Sometimes you just need that Light's Justice stat level weapon to clean up and finish things off with your other effects. Warrior not being one of the best classes since it doesn't have a ping-based hero power like a mage or a druid to complement its 1-damage pings here. But it has whirlwinds and inner ranges and rush minions and things that can help you find those breakpoints. So I think this is potentially going to be something that helps really define that Menagerie archetype and become something we see quite often. Anyway, thanks guys for watching. Appreciate the support. Sorry if the editing is a little worse than normal. I kind of just did this in OBS because there's so many cards coming out that I have to get the content out. We can't have Ed just you know, edit every single one super professionally. So we're kind of trying to keep up with all of the influx of cards to make sure we get the information out to you as soon as possible. So I appreciate that. And if you guys have any sort of comments, what your favorite card is or things like that, make sure to drop them below. Any comments are good comments. If you just want to say you don't like my hair, just do that, and it's fantastic. It drives that engagement, and I love it. So I love the things that you say, and I'll be sure to be reading them and trying to respond along with you guys. Thanks, till next time, take care guys. Big kahuna for most people, I'd say, is Elementals will no longer be a minion type in every match. So for a while, Elementals were new, and they've been in every single game, and if you're like me, you've been thinking, oh my god, I can't wait until we stop seeing Elementals in every single game every day. It's been too long, Blizzard, please stop, get rid of them.